Hi, well, I'm going to try to do a lecture on video so you guys can watch it on YouTube. So, chapter 20, we have three essential questions. The first one is compare and contrast the characteristics of the marine reptiles and birds. Number two, give examples of adaptations that allow some reptile and bird species to inhabit the ocean. And number three, explain the adaptations that allow birds to be far more ranging than reptiles. So, in this chapter, we're going to be learning about the marine reptiles and birds. There are 7 different species of sea turtles on Earth, and they spend most of their time in the ocean, except when they go to lay their eggs. Now, only the females go to on land to lay their eggs, not the males. The males stay in the ocean, except with the Hawaiian sea turtles. The Hawaiian green sea turtles, both of male and female, will be seen sometimes sunbathing on the sand, just as they like to do. Amphibians. So most of us know what amphibians are, like frogs and salamanders. Okay, as an adult, they live on land, but as a juvenile, they actually live in the water. A lot of times we've seen, when we're younger, we've seen little tadpoles and maybe played with them, maybe watched them grow from the tadpole and then growing their legs and their little feetses. So they're very much like a fish once they are tadpole because they have gills, so they're able to breathe, and they have a tail, so they're able to swim. As adults, they end up developing small little lungs, and then they can also breathe through their skin. So they need to spend some time in the water because they need to keep moisture on their skin, and then also then they spend some time on land. They do lay their eggs in the water right around the aquatic plants. That way they're a little safer, and that way they're actually moist as soon as obviously the juveniles have to be in the water. The next there are reptiles. So with reptiles, about 300 million years ago, they evolved from amphibians. So they're the first animal to be able to survive on land and not be in the ocean or water at all. They had special adaptations that allowed them to do this. So some of their adaptations are going to be include they have protective eggs, they have a really hard shell, and then they have a tough skin, they have scales, they have a stronger skeletal system, and they have a very complex organ system, much more like we do, as opposed to something more simple like the fish or like the amphibians and frogs and salamanders. They also have an amniotic egg, which they allows them to have a nourishing sac and a harder outer area to help feed their developing their embryo. There are about 7,000 species of reptiles. They all breathe using lungs. They lay their eggs on land, and they're the first. Let's see what else. And also they're able to regulate their temperature with their their metabolic rate is due to the temperature. So whether it's really warm outside, then they're going to be more active. But if it's colder outside, then they're going to want to stay very lethargic. They don't want to eat much. They don't want to do much. But if they get too hot, then they just go back in the shade and cool off for a while, like you'll see snakes and stuff too on occasion. The marine reptiles have special adaptations to regulate the salt within salt glands. So right above their eyes, they have these little salt glands that actually are able to get rid of some of when they have too much salt in their system, they're actually able to get rid of it and they also, another way they get rid of the salt is through urination. And then we go to sea snakes. Moving on to sea snakes. They're very, very similar to their land counterparts. So they look a lot of them look a lot like the snakes that we see on land. There are about 50 species that live in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And they get about 1 to 2 meters depending on which species they are. They usually live in kind of like a more shallow coastal areas because they still kind of come up and see what's going on. Most of them are venomous and carnivorous, so they actually want to eat meat. But some of them are actually able to die for like 2 hours at a time when they're searching for food. And most of the snakes do give birth to live baby snakes, so they don't really lay eggs like they do on land, but they have live births. And then marine lizards. Think about like iguanas. Iguana is the main marine lizard. These are different than the normal iguanas that you might see like in Mexico or some of the like Costa Rica and some of the other places that you see iguanas. So the marine lizard or these iguanas are only found in the Galapagos Islands. They're kind of a funky shaped. They have their faces kind of not really cute, like some iguanas are. But their ambling on land is not very good, but they're able to swim really well because they've adapted to be able to do that. They dive in the ocean to search for their food, and they live in large groups, and they lay eggs on land, and they also have salt glands to remove some of the salt that they need to when they have too much salt in their system. Next, we're going to talk about is saltwater crocodiles. The saltwater crocodiles, they are able to live in estuaries where the salt and fresh water meet, and they usually live like in mangrove swamps. Sometimes they go into rivers just to kind of cross over or into the open ocean, but usually for the most part they kind of want to be more where it's swampy area so they can hide and they can get their prey when they need to. They're obviously very predatory, and so they attack their prey quite a bit. They also have salt glands that allow them to release the salt. That's why they can live in the salt water, whereas alligators don't. That's why they can't live in salt water and they're only freshwater. There are species of saltwater and mostly found in like Puerto Rico, Florida, Caribbean, Central and South, northern coast of South America. And crocodiles are usually have a V-shaped head versus a U-shaped head that the alligators have. So that's some of the differences between those two. Moving on to sea turtles. I know this is kind of fast and everything else, but I don't want it to be too long because then you guys won't listen. And there is a lot of information, but you guys should have read the chapter, so this should be pretty easy to follow along. So next is the sea turtles. Okay, as we talked a little bit about them a little bit earlier, we're going to kind of go in a little more detail about them. So they have a hard shell, except for the leatherbacks. The leatherbacks obviously don't have a hard shell, but they have something else called a carapace, a carapace, that allows them to do some other things. So I'll get into that in a few minutes. Each different species has a different pattern on their shell and their fins. So they're actually specific pattern to their species. Their shells actually grow with the turtle. So like a lobster or a crab, they're going to shed their shell as they get bigger, whereas the turtle's shell actually grows with them. And a sea turtle, unlike a land turtle, cannot actually retract their head all the way into their shell. So their head is always sticking out somewhat. They are adapted to diving. Their flippers are very, very strong for them to be able to swim down deep and go get their food and just kind of swim around, maybe even get away from some of their predators. Mostly they feed on like jellyfish and crabs and sponges and squid and other marine vegetation. Some are going to be herbivores, like the Hawaiian green sea turtle is an herbivore. So they only feed on the plants and in the ocean, as opposed to some of the other ones that have really strong jaws that can crush crabs and other invertebrates that they eat. So like the loggerhead has adapted jaws to be able to crush their invertebrates, and where the green sea turtles have like serrated jaws so they can take the and crush all the greens that they need to eat. They spend most of their time at sea. The males, as I said, once they leave the sand once they've been hatched, they don't usually return to land except for the Hawaiian green sea turtle. And then the females, the only time they do return to land is to mate or to actually lay their eggs. And when they're laying their eggs, they lay during the summer. They usually lay about 3 times a year, and they usually lay several eggs at a time. They usually between 80 and 90 eggs in each time of their nest when they are during the summer. So one of the species of turtles that is not found in the North America is the flatback sea turtle, and it's found only like in Australia, Papua New Guinea, and other islands in the South Pacific. Because due to being able to swim that far, they can't really get to the North America where the other ones are. Okay, and then getting into the leatherback sea turtle. The leatherback sea turtle is the largest of the sea turtles. Usually it gets up to about 2 meters, which is going to be about 6-ish feet, and they can weigh up to about 2,000 pounds. They have a wide range of habitat because they are able to control their circulatory system, so they can control how much blood flow is going to different areas of their body. So they're able to really kind of control how much heat and how much cold they are depending on where they're living. Um, they also have a layer of blubber right underneath their carapace, so that helps keep them warm also. And so when it gets colder, they retract or they slow their blood circulation down, especially into their flippers, and then they stay warmer that way. And because they're so large, they're actually able to keep in the heat that they have to make sure that they stay warm. They just need to stay warmer than the temperature outside of their, or which is in the water. Um, so that's kind of cool that they can. I would like to control my blood flow if it was colder and be able to not have blood heat escaping through that way. Okay, moving on to the next section, which is going to be the bird section. There are about 10,000 species of birds, and all birds have specific characteristics. They all have feathers and they all have wings. Not all fly, but they all have feathers and all have wings. They are the most successful species on Earth to be able to survive. And they can also control their body temperature. So depending on where they are and where they're living, they can control their body temperature also. And they're endothermic, meaning that they have warmth inside. So they can live in a variety of places. They tolerate a variety of different temperatures. They have really high metabolism. A lot of birds eat twice their weight almost daily, which is kind of crazy. Wouldn't we like to eat twice our weight? I don't think so. Then we can eat whatever we wanted and still stay that way. Most birds have hollow bones which allows them to fly. They actually have cross bridges inside their bones to keep them strong, but they're hollow, so they're lighter, so they're able to fly. Unlike penguins, which are heavier bones, that's one of the reasons why they can't fly. And also their wings are much more like fish flippers as opposed to bird wings, even though they are a bird because they do have feathers and they have wings, not flippers. I'm having a little bit of problem here, turning my page. Hang on. Moving on to shorebirds. Okay, so shorebirds, they live around the ocean, but they don't live in the ocean, and they don't really go into the ocean to actually get their food. They live right on the shoreline, and a lot of times they're getting all like the little crabs that might be right there. They have different shaped beaks depending on how far down into the sand they go to get their food. And a lot of times their beak is going to be indicative of what they eat. And then we have, moving on from shorebirds, we go to seabirds. So our seabirds, they actually spend most of their time out at sea. And so they are able to fly for long periods of time. And they only return to land pretty much to lay eggs. And they live in large colonies. And they have salt glands in their nostrils. So unlike the other animals that have them right above their eyelids, they actually have them in their nostrils because when they dive down into the water, they got to be able to get rid of that salt that they've ingested as they've gone in to dive for food. So as I started talking about a little bit about penguins, and I'm going to continue. They're unique because they are extraordinary flyers actually under the water, not above the water. So that's kind of cool. And they can swim up to about 25 miles per hour, which is pretty fast. I can't run that fast. Can you? No, not really. But when they walk on land, they kind of waddle. They're not very coordinated on land, and sometimes their flippers actually help them balance on land. And if it's really icy or snowy, sometimes they just go on their belly and glide to wherever they need to go, and they kind of have fun. Looks like they're always having fun. I want to go do that. So what's really kind of interesting is there are not any species found above the equator. Most of them live in the Antarctic, and then some live in Africa and South America. They also, kind of like the leatherback turtles, have a layer of fat right under their skin to help keep them warm. They also have waterproof feathers that help keep them insulated. So they do what they call preening. So you see them kind of spreading their oils all around their bodies. That helps them keep waterproof and so they can stay warm, especially in those really cold Antarctic areas. Most of them lay their eggs during the winter, so their chicks can hatch during the summer. And then there is one breed, the emperor breed penguins, that only have one mate for life, and that the male and female both share the responsibility of incubating the eggs and then taking care of the chicks until they're on their own. And then the one that lives the furthest north or closest to the equator is going to be the Galapagos penguins, and they're very small. And the reason why they can actually survive is because the currents are actually bringing in the colder water and the nutrients that they need to be able to survive in that little bit warmer area, which is closer to the equator. Most penguins are going to feed on krill, fish, small crustaceans, squid. Some of their natural predators are going to be like whales, seals, other birds that might eat their eggs, and anything else that might eat eggs and that find their eggs and eat their eggs. So those are going to be their predators. Moving on to the tubinosis, which is a bird with a very long, straw-like nostril and thick beak. They can fly for months and even years, just kind of flying over the open ocean, just kind of cruising and gliding all over the place. Some of those examples are going to be like an albatross or shearwater or a petrel, and sometimes they migrate thousands and thousands of kilometers across the ocean looking for food. So that's and they find their food with their keen eyesight and their sense of smell. Some of the other ones are going to be like an albatross. They can actually lock out their wings and just kind of use the winds to kind of fly around, and they don't actually have to use a lot of energy that way. Some of the tuminoses are interesting to track because they can migrate so far, and they also have really hooked beaks, so they can actually catch fish and squid. But they also eat krill and plankton, just kind of like some of the other fish, and we know that whales eat krill and plankton quite a bit. And they also they also actually find one mate for life. The tubinosis mate for life also. Okay, moving on to pelicans and other diving birds. They live along the coast of the colonies, and they hunt for their prey by going into the ocean. So they usually kind of scoop up a big batch of water, and their water seeps out, and then they swallow their fish whole. So that's why a lot of times when you see the people at different sea places, they toss whole fish and they just kind of gulp them down. That's because they're used to doing that. They usually live on the East Coast, and then also the coast of California, and then the Gulf of Mexico and Puerto Rico. They have the American white pelican, which breeds inland as opposed to near the ocean. And then they also are kind of unique because they go into the salt and fresh water for their food. So they are actually a little bit different. They don't usually frigate birds don't usually go into the water because their feathers aren't very waterproof. So they need to make sure that they don't go in there as much because they can't handle it as well. Okay, moving on to gulls and terns. We at Villa Park have a problem with our seagulls all the time because kids are always leaving food out. So they're always dive bombing us. So we're always trying to be careful and not to get pooped on as you're walking from class after nutrition or lunch. The thing with gulls is they are kind of scavengers. They'll pretty much eat whatever you give them. Whatever they can find, they'll eat, and they'll make it deal with it. There are pretty much two different types of gulls. There's the greater herring gull and then the black gull, black-backed gull. Those are the ones that are most common in the United States. And so besides the foods that they will scavenge around from us or wherever else, they will also eat crabs and other invertebrates, and they'll eat out of a garbage can, as you've seen. They'll pretty much eat on whatever they can. And then there's terns. Terns are a relative to gull. A gull relative to a seagull, and there are many species that take long migrations. Sometimes they'll fly from the Arctic all the way to the Antarctic. So that's pretty crazy. They're going from one end of the globe to the other end of the globe. That's pretty amazing to me. Most plunge into the water and to get their food, but some will just skim along the side and pick up little things along the way. So that is pretty much our lecture for this chapter. I hope you guys are doing well. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to post this on YouTube, and have a great day. Bye.